Security, get this guy out of here. Unless he pays me $40,000, he's not welcome at my wedding. Two bodyguards moved toward me as my daughter giggled into the microphone. The guests gasped, her in-laws laughed. My chest was pounding, but I didn't move. She thought she'd used money to erase me. What she didn't know tonight, she'd regret it. Before we get into what led to this, if you believe karma always finds a way, subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Zungduan opening night. The chandeliers threw 1,000 tiny suns across crystal and polished marble, but the light that steadied me came from years ago, the small bedside lamp in a quiet room where a little girl tried to sleep without her mother. I read fairy tales until her hiccuping sobs slowed, then sat there anyway, listening to the soft clock and the softer breathing. Back then, Melissa held my finger with her whole hand. Back then, I was home. I became two parents in one. I packed lunches with corny notes. I learned how to braid hair from a neighbor and practiced until it looked decent. I ironed school uniforms before dawn and closed the bank after dusk. When report cards came, I framed them. When piano recitals ended, I clapped until my palms stung. I gave, and still, they wanted more. When she dreamed of studying abroad, I sold the shares I had saved for early retirement. When she needed a first car, I signed, delaying repairs on my aging roof. When the city called to her, I put my name on the lease so the landlord would sleep easy. I told myself it was investment not in profits, but in a person. She called me her hero. On Father's Day, she'd write, "The man who gave me everything and asked for nothing." I never asked for anything, not even gratitude. All I wanted was to see her become kind. But frost creeps quietly. Calls shortened. Visits slipped. Photos appeared online with new friends, new restaurants, new laughter that never reached me. The first time she brought the businessman home, his smile was polite, his eyes calculating. I shook his hand anyway. Fathers learned to swallow worry like bitter tea. Planning for the wedding began without me. Dates changed, venues shifted, and somehow I learned last. The in-laws spoke with velvet voices that hid knives, compliments that felt like measurements. I noticed Melissa defending them more than she defended me. The air between us thinned until it was mostly silence. On the day itself, I showed up early in my best suit. The one my wife once said made me look trustworthy. A coordinator glanced at my name and waved me toward a distant table near the kitchen doors. No place card at the family table. No speech slot. Only steam from swinging doors and the smell of boiled vegetables. I sat down and folded my hands to stop the tremor. I had one secret left, a quiet fact written in ink, and I held it like a steadying stone in my pocket. I thought of the bedside lamp, of promises made to the memory of a patient woman, and I told myself to wait. Melissa's dreams were always expensive, but I never let her see the price tag. When she asked about studying abroad, I smiled and said yes, then quietly sold the stocks I had saved for early retirement. I told myself, "You'll have time later. She needs this now." Later never came. Her first car arrived with a ribbon on the hood. She squealed, hugged me, then sped off with friends who barely noticed the old man standing in the driveway. I put off repairing my leaking roof because her insurance payment was due. It didn't matter. A roof could wait, her safety could not. Then came her first apartment, a glass and steel tower in the city, the kind of place her friends posted online with cocktails in hand. The landlord hesitated until I co-signed the lease, guaranteeing payments. Melissa walked through the lobby beaming, never once asking what it took for me to make that possible. Back then, I thought love meant erasing struggle from her life. If I carried the weight, she could walk lighter. I worked late hours at the bank, shoulders aching, eyes red, just to keep her path smooth. I thought she saw it. I thought she cared. But distance crept in. Phone calls came less often, and when they did, they were filled with excuses. "Dad, I'm busy." "Dad, it's late here." "Dad, we'll talk next week." Next week turned into next month. And then months with nothing at all. The shift was slow, like a tide rolling out. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I called too often. Maybe I hovered. But the truth was simpler. Melissa was building a life where I no longer fit. When she introduced me to her fiancé, I felt it instantly. He was polished, practiced the kind of man who wore wealth like a second skin. He shook my hand with a smile, but I could see his eyes flick past me, as though measuring and discarding me in one glance. Melissa noticed. She didn't defend me. Instead, she laughed at his jokes. even the ones aimed at me. It was the first time I felt like a guest in my own daughter's life, and from there the door only closed tighter. The wedding plans unfolded like theater rehearsals where I was cast as the extra. Melissa's voice on the phone was brisk. "Dad, it's already handled. Venues changed, menus decided, guest lists approved all without me." I waited for her to ask my opinion, but the line always went quiet, then disconnected. The first time I met her fiancé's parents, their smiles were polite, but their words cut soft and deep. "Melissa has done so well for herself," her future mother-in-law said, eyes sliding past me as though I were invisible. "It's remarkable considering her background." The pause after background was long enough for me to feel it tighten around my throat. Melissa laughed too loudly at their comments, eager to impress them. She no longer looked at me for approval, she looked at them. I realized then that the daughter I raised was bending herself into their shape, and in their eyes, I was a shadow to be erased. I sat through family dinners where conversations flowed like rivers I couldn't cross. Business deals, expensive vacations, the kind of wealth that filled rooms with false brightness. When I tried to speak, the silence after my words was heavier than any insult. Melissa never bridged it. She let it hang there, as if embarrassed by me. The closer the wedding drew, the farther I was pushed back. My name wasn't on the program. My place wasn't at the family table. And though I was the one who taught her how to take her first steps, she now walked proudly as if I were just another stranger in the crowd. I smiled when she glanced at me, but inside, the cracks spread. Trust chipped away, dignity worn thin. Still, I stayed quiet. Still, I told myself this is her moment, not mine. But I should have known. The moment wasn't hers alone. It was the stage where betrayal would stand under the lights, and I would be its audience. The morning of the wedding, I polished my shoes twice, though no one would notice. I wore the suit my late wife once said made me look like a man who could be trusted. I looked in the mirror and whispered to her picture, "I'll be there for our daughter, no matter what." When I arrived, the venue gleamed like a palace, white roses along the aisle, chandeliers hanging like frozen fireworks. Guests laughed in clusters, glasses of champagne catching light. I searched for my place card, but my name was nowhere near the family table. A young coordinator, too busy to meet my eyes, waved me toward a seat near the kitchen doors. The clang of pots and hiss of steam would be my companions. I told myself it didn't matter. At least I was present. At least I would see her walk in her dress. But the looks began almost immediately. Melissa's new relatives glanced at me, then at one another, whispering behind manicured hands. A cousin smirked as if I had wandered in by mistake. Her fiancé's father walked past, barely nodding, as though acknowledging me cost him dignity. Melissa entered the hall, radiant in lace and diamonds. For a heartbeat, I thought she might search for me, might smile, might remember who carried her through storms. Instead, she turned toward her new family, glowing at their approval. My seat by the kitchen doors stayed invisible to her. Dinner arrived, plates placed before me almost as an afterthought. Guests at my table asked polite, distant questions, then turned to gossip among themselves. My words sank into the clatter of silverware. I sat straight, hands folded, the secret still in my pocket. The deed, the proof, the one thing that reminded me I had not been erased. I told myself to wait for the right moment. Wait, even as humiliation tightened around my chest like iron chains. The night was not done testing me, not yet. The chandeliers glowed like constellations above the ballroom as the music softened. Melissa, still in her gown, walked to the center and took the microphone. Her smile faltered into something colder. I felt the air shift before she spoke. "Security, get this guy out of here," she said, pointing directly at me. "Unless he pays me $40,000, he's not welcome at my wedding." For a moment, silence reigned. Then gasps rippled through the hall. 2 bodyguards began moving toward me, their shoulders wide as doors. Melissa's in-laws chuckled, mistaking cruelty for confidence. I sat frozen, my chest pounding like a drum inside a coffin. Guests whispered, some covering their mouths, others leaning in for a better look. I had become tonight's entertainment. Melissa's eyes sparkled, but not with love. They gleamed with calculation, as if erasing me publicly would win her more favor with her husband's wealthy family. She giggled into the microphone, twisting the blade of humiliation deeper. I wanted to stand, to shout, to remind her of nights spent braiding her hair, of mornings making breakfast before the bank, of the roof that leaked because I paid for her safety instead. But the words stuck in my throat. Dignity demanded silence. Rage demanded patience. The bodyguards were steps away now, close enough for me to see the veins in their necks. My palms were slick, but I did not move. Let them come. Let her laugh. Let them all believe I had nothing left. Because what none of them knew, what Melissa could never imagine, was that the penthouse she bragged about, the crown jewel of her new life, was still mine. The deed, the power, the truth all tucked away, waiting for this very night. I sat in the storm of humiliation, a quiet ember burning steady. Tonight, she thought she had won. Tonight, she thought she had erased me. But tonight, the secret in my pocket would change everything. The sting of her words echoed long after the ballroom laughter faded. But humiliation always pulls you backward, dragging you through memories you once carried with pride. I saw again the day I walked into the bank's office, papers trembling in my hands, signing away my early retirement. The stocks I had saved gone in an instant. Also, Melissa could chase her dream of studying abroad. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I had time to rebuild, that her education was worth more than any cushion of comfort I had earned. I pictured her walking across a stage, cap and gown swaying, her smile shining at me from across the crowd. That vision was enough to quiet the ache of watching my golden years disappear. I remember walking home that evening under a streetlight's glow, clutching the receipt of the transaction. My hands shook, but not from regret, from love. Love that made sacrifice feel almost holy. Melissa never knew. I never told her how close I came to losing the house, how many hours I added at the bank just to keep the balance afloat. She only saw the checks clearing, the tuition paid, the opportunities opening like doors that never closed on her. And I was proud that she walked through them, proud that she called me her hero in letters sent from faraway dorm rooms. I pinned them to the fridge, little proof that the sleepless nights were not in vain. But memory has sharp edges, because standing there in that ballroom, her laughter cutting through me, I could still hear her voice from years ago. "Dad, I couldn't have done this without you." Now she stood on a stage and demanded $40,000, as if my worth could be priced, as if all I had already given wasn't enough. I closed my eyes, clinging to the past, and whispered to myself, I remember everything. After tuition came the bigger dream, Melissa's first company. She called me one night, her voice electric with ambition. "Dad, this is it. I just need some startup capital, just a little push." I wanted to say no. I wanted to tell her I was tired, that I had already given more than I could, but the word no never left my mouth. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the mortgage documents. My house, the home where she learned to ride her bike in the driveway, where her mother's laughter still lingered in the walls, became collateral. I signed anyway. The next months blurred into sacrifice. I skipped dinners out, cut corners on groceries, patched old clothes instead of buying new ones. I told coworkers at the bank I was fine, though the stress carved deeper lines into my face. At night I lay awake, wondering if I had gambled everything for nothing. Melissa never saw that side. To her, the funds appeared as if by magic. She launched her project, bragged about her independence, and smiled for cameras that would never show me in the background. She never asked if the mortgage meant risk. She never asked what I had given up. She never asked. I remember the day she called, triumphant. "We did it, Dad," she said. My chest swelled. For a fleeting moment, the risk felt worth it. I let myself believe that one day she would understand the price. But sitting in that ballroom, hearing her demand $40,000 from me like a gate fee, I realized the truth. She had learned to take without ever learning to see. My sacrifices were invisible ink on the pages of her story, and I was the fool who kept handing her the pen. Melissa's career began to bloom, and with every blossom, I felt myself fade from the picture. I used to stand in the front row, clapping until my palms burned at her recitals. But now her victories came in the form of glossy magazine articles, social media posts, and sleek interviews where she painted herself as self-made. I remember sitting at my desk late one night, the glow of the computer screen harsh on my tired eyes. I scrolled through photos she had posted online, Melissa at launch parties, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, champagne glasses raised high. In every caption, she wrote, "I built this on my own." Not once did she mention the man who co-signed her lease, who mortgaged his home, who sold away his golden years to keep her dreams alive. My name had been erased as neatly as chalk from a blackboard. Worse still were the moments I found out secondhand. A coworker at the bank would mention, "Hey, isn't that your daughter in the paper? Big event downtown last night?" And I would smile, pretending I had known, pretending I had been invited. Inside, the silence was deafening. I clipped those articles anyway, tucked them in a drawer no one opened. Not for pride, for proof. Proof that once I had been part of her rise. Proof that my sacrifices hadn't all vanished into smoke. But the world only saw Melissa polished, radiant, untouchable. And I was just a tired old man, watching from the sidelines, a ghost haunting the edges of her spotlight. It hurt more than the sleepless nights, more than the hunger of skipped meals, because neglect is quieter than cruelty, but it cuts deeper. And the deeper it cut, the more I began to realize. The daughter I raised was slowly erasing me from her story. It was at a dinner party that the knife twisted deeper. I had been invited as an afterthought, seated at the far end of a glossy table that reflected chandeliers like shattered stars. Melissa's fiancé sat beside her, charming, confident, the kind of man who knew how to command a room. I tried to blend into the background, content just to be near her. But then I heard it. Words not meant for me, carried across the table on a careless laugh. My dad, he's just old history. I built myself. The Frenchians of the Terrence. The room chuckled softly, a ripple of approval moving through the wealthy crowd. My fork froze midway to my mouth. My ears rang, drowning out the hum of conversation. Old history. 2 words, sharp enough to cut bone. I stared at Melissa, waiting for her to correct herself, to remember the nights I stayed awake balancing ledgers so she could attend private school, the mornings I went without breakfast so she wouldn't. But she didn't flinch. She leaned closer to her fiancé, eyes sparkling, basking in the glow of her own reinvention. I tasted metal, shame, anger, grief, all mixed together until I could hardly breathe. I lowered my fork and wiped my mouth with a napkin, masking the tremor in my hands. No one noticed. No one ever did. I excused myself early that night, stepping out into the cold air. I walked the streets aimlessly, lights blurring into streaks. Her words followed me like shadows. Old history. I had given her everything, my savings, my health, my years, and to her I was nothing more than a faded photograph, ready to be tucked away in some forgotten drawer. It was then the realization struck me, quiet but merciless. Melissa no longer saw me as her father. She saw me as an obstacle, and obstacles, in her world, were meant to be removed. I carried her words with me like stones in my chest. Old history. They echoed when I woke, when I ate, when I lay in the silence of my room at night. Finally, one evening, I sat across from my oldest friend, Roberto, at a dim cafe. He was the only one I trusted with the truth. "You look tired, Pedro," he said, studying me over his cup. "What's going on?" I tried to smile, but it broke halfway. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I gave her everything, Roberto. I sold my shares, mortgaged my house, worked until my bones ached. I gave, and still, she wants more. She acts like I was never there. Roberto's face tightened. He knew me long enough to recognize the weight behind my voice. "And what do you get in return?" "Silence," I whispered. Or worse, shame. She hides me like a secret. At her dinners, I'm invisible. At her parties, I'm an afterthought. And now she laughs about me like I'm a burden she's already buried. "Bass." "Toes," intested. "Cannot of it, man." I stared into my coffee, the surface rippling with each tremor in my hand. Was I wrong to give so much? Was I blind? Roberto leaned forward, his voice steady. "Love isn't wrong, Pedro, but sometimes love is wasted on those who only know how to take." His words pierced, but they also planted something, a seed of clarity. I had spent decades sacrificing, thinking love was measured in what I surrendered. But sitting in that cafe, the truth began to settle in my bones. Melissa didn't just forget my sacrifices. She erased them, and one day, she would try to erase me too. That night, as I walked home under the street lamps, I clenched my fists against the cold. For the first time, the thought whispered, perhaps I wasn't powerless. Perhaps there was still a way to balance the scales. Roberto's words stayed with me, but so did Melissa's actions. Each public gathering became another stage for my humiliation. At family dinners with her fiancé's relatives, I sat at the edge of the table, listening to conversations I was never invited into. They spoke of business ventures and luxury vacations, their laughter rising like walls around me. When someone asked about her upbringing, Melissa smiled tightly. "Oh, we didn't have much contact growing up. My dad was distant." Distant. The word sliced through me sharper than any blade. I remembered the nights I slept in a chair beside her bed, The mornings I rushed to iron her school uniform before work, the countless moments I carried her burdens, so she wouldn't feel the weight. And now she painted me as a ghost who had barely been there at all. The table nodded politely, accepting her version without question. No one looked my way. No one asked me to correct the lie. I pressed my napkin into my lap, knuckles white beneath the fabric. At another event, when her in-laws praised her resilience, she laughed and said, "Well, I had to build everything on my own. Some people aren't cut out to help." Her eyes flicked toward me, just for a second, enough to let me know the jab was deliberate. The guests chuckled, raising their glasses to toast her strength. I raised mine too, my hand steady, though my heart trembled. I swallowed wine that tasted like ashes. Humiliation has a sound. It is the silence that follows your absence in someone else's story. And every time Melissa rewrote our past to erase me, I felt myself shrinking. But deep inside, beneath the shame, something else was forming. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something sharper. The seed Roberto had planted was beginning to grow. The night of the wedding, when Melissa's voice cracked like a whip across the ballroom, demanding $40,000 from me as if I were a beggar, I felt the weight of every sacrifice collapse onto my chest. The gasps, the laughter, the mocking glances, they blurred into one suffocating haze. But my hand reached instinctively into my pocket, where a worn photograph rested. My wife's smile, frozen in time, gazed back at me. The woman I had promised to protect our daughter for, the woman who had whispered on her deathbed, "Take care of Melissa. Make sure she never feels alone." I whispered back to that picture under my breath. I kept my promise. I gave her everything. And still, it wasn't enough. As the bodyguards drew closer, my mind replayed the years like a cruel slideshow. Signing away my retirement, mortgaging the house, long nights at the bank, the roof that leaked because her car insurance mattered more. My pride, my youth, my health all traded piece by piece for her comfort. And here I was, priced at $40,000, as if love came with an admission fee. I lifted my eyes and looked at Melissa, radiant, ruthless, unrecognizable. She laughed into the microphone, and in that moment, I saw not my daughter, but a stranger wearing her face. I folded the photograph carefully, pressing it flat against my heart. The ember inside me, once dim, flared into something steady. Roberto's words returned. "Sometimes love is wasted on those who only know how to take." Humiliation had broken me before. But tonight, in the very hall where she tried to erase me, it forged something new. A vow whispered, not in anger, but in icy resolve. She would not erase me. Not tonight, not ever. After the wedding, I returned home to silence. The suit still clung to me like armor dented in battle. I laid it across the chair, sat at my desk, and unlocked the drawer where I kept the papers no one remembered. Folders stacked neatly, dust curling at the corners. Proof of years that had not vanished, no matter how Melissa tried to rewrite them. On top was the deed. Thick paper, weighty, stamped with ink that had not faded. Melissa's penthouse, the gleaming jewel she flaunted on social media, the place she paraded her in-laws through with pride, stood under one name only. Mine. I ran my finger over the letters. Pedro Vargas. Not hers, not theirs. Mine. Every brick, every window, every chandelier she claimed was built on my sacrifice, rested on my signature. I leaned back, the humiliation of the ballroom echoing in my chest, but this time it met something stronger. Memory became weapon. The secret I had carried in my pocket that night was no illusion. It was the law, it was truth. Melissa had tried to erase me, but here, in these papers, I was carved into stone. The penthouse she flaunted was a castle built on foundations I had laid, and without me, it crumbled. For the first time in years, my hands stopped trembling. I breathed slow, steady, as if the paper itself lent me strength. I realized then that revenge didn't need shouting, or fists, or rage. Revenge could be quiet. Revenge could be written in ink. I stacked the folders neatly again, each one a blade she had forgotten existed, and I whispered into the empty room. "You thought you erased me, Melissa, but you built your empire on my name. And now, it's time you remembered it." The deed was only the beginning. Beneath it lay a paper trail Melissa never bothered to trace, because she never imagined she would need to. I pulled out contract after contract, each one heavy with my signature. The loan agreement for her first apartment, the lease papers for her office space, the insurance documents I had personally guaranteed. Even the vehicle registration for the car she still drove, my name etched quietly beneath hers. Every success she flaunted had roots in soil I had watered. I spread the papers across my desk like pieces of a puzzle, and the picture they painted was undeniable. Melissa's empire wasn't hers. It was mine, dressed up in her name. Without me, the foundation cracked. Without me, the walls fell. I remembered how proud she had been showing her in-laws the penthouse, how she bragged about building a life from nothing. They clapped, impressed. But they didn't know that every chandelier shining above them was anchored by my sacrifice. Her lie had become their truth until now. My humiliation at the wedding had been public, but this discovery, this reckoning, was private. Papers don't lie. Papers don't laugh. Papers don't betray. They simply wait for the moment they're called to speak. And I knew then they would speak for me. Not in anger, not in desperation, but in cold, steady fact. Melissa thought she had silenced me with shame. She forgot I had left my voice in ink long before she tried to erase me. I stacked the contracts carefully, binding them with a clip. Each page was no longer a memory, it was a weapon, and one day soon I would unsheath it. In the days after the wedding, whispers reached me. Melissa's in-laws were boasting to their circle about the grand penthouse, about her rise from nothing to luxury. They wore her story like a jewel proof that their son had chosen well. They spoke of her independence, her resilience, her brilliance. I listened quietly, but inside I laughed, not with joy, but with a bitter edge, because I knew something they didn't. Their arrogance, their pride, their smug glances in the ballroom, all of it was built on my name. They were dining in rooms I had paid for, praising a success that was nothing more than a mask stitched from my sacrifices. The thought didn't bring me anger. It brought me clarity. Their world of glass towers and velvet evenings was balanced on foundations they couldn't see, foundations that belonged to me, and when truth finally touched them, the whole structure would shatter. I remembered standing at the back of their dinner parties, invisible, listening as they praised Melissa for being self-made. I remembered her laughing along, never correcting them, and I realized something. The lie wasn't just hers. It was theirs too. They wanted to believe it. They needed to believe it. But lies have short lives when paper is waiting to speak. I placed the deed and the contracts back in order, the stack taller than I remembered. To her in-laws, I was a shadow. To Melissa, I was old history. But in truth, I was the ground beneath their feet, and soon they would all feel the earth shake. I walked into the lawyer's office with a folder tucked under my arm, my steps steady, my heart calm. Years of humiliation had boiled down to this moment. I didn't need rage anymore. I needed precision. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s, spread the documents across the polished desk. His brow lifted slightly as he read each page, the deed, the contracts, the guarantees. He tapped one finger against the penthouse title. "This is all still under your name, Mr. Vargas?" "Yes," I said quietly. She never asked me to transfer it. She assumed I already had. He leaned back, studying me. "Then you hold every card." The words settled over me like armor. Every card. For so long I had felt stripped bare, powerless, erased. But the law remembered what Melissa chose to forget, and the law stood with me. We spent hours reviewing options, quiet actions, legal steps, all neat and binding. No theatrics, no shouting, just paperwork, cold, undeniable paperwork. The lawyer explained how assets could be frozen, how trusts could be created, how access could be cut off with a single notarized signature. Each detail tightened the knot of strategy in my mind. I left his office with the folder heavier than before, but my shoulders lighter. The path was clear. Melissa thought she had buried me beneath shame, but shame has no teeth against ink and law. That night, I laid the documents on my dining table, the lamp casting them in golden light. For the first time in years, I slept without waking in the dark, because I knew the storm was no longer hers to control. It was mine. The next morning, I returned to the lawyer's office with resolve carved into my steps. We began the process of moving pieces, quiet but deliberate. The penthouse Melissa flaunted on every social post, the one she paraded her in-laws through, was signed into a trust in my name, untouchable by her hands. Accounts linked to her ventures, guaranteed under my credit, were flagged and prepared for closure. Each document I signed felt less like vengeance and more like balance. My pen carved lines across the page, severing her access with every stroke. The lawyer explained the mechanics carefully. Once complete, Melissa would find doors she thought open suddenly locked, cards she thought endless suddenly declined. I imagined her face when the truth reached her, not in a scream, not in a confrontation, but in the quiet shock of reality refusing to bend. That was the justice I wanted. Not a scene, not a fight, just silence on her end, the same silence she had given me. As I slid the final signature across the desk, the lawyer looked at me. "Mr. Vargas, after this, she won't be able to touch a single cent without your permission." I nodded, folding the documents back into their folder. "That's the point," I said. My voice was calm, but inside, something shifted, a weight I had carried for decades, finally loosening. Walking out of that office, I felt the city differently. The streets weren't louder, the lights weren't brighter, but I was. For the first time since Melissa began erasing me, I knew. I wasn't just her past. I was the ground beneath her present. And I was pulling it back, piece by piece. For nights, I sat at my dining table with a pen in hand, drafting words I thought I might say. Speeches filled with anger, with grief, with all the years of sacrifice turned to ash. I wrote line after line, then tore them into shreds. Words felt weak. Words could be twisted, mocked, dismissed. Documents could not. So instead of polishing speeches, I polished the evidence. I placed each deed, each contract, each notarized trust in protective sleeves. I arranged them in order, a silent army of truth. No embellishments, no need for raised voices. The papers would speak louder than I ever could. I practiced stillness in the mirror, breathing slow, teaching my face to show no tremor, no fury, only calm, only certainty. Because when the moment came, I wanted Melissa to see not a broken old man begging for respect, but a father who had turned every humiliation into resolve. One evening, as I slid the last document into its folder, I whispered into the empty room, "No anger, just balance." And in that moment, I understood. The sweetest revenge was not in shouting down her lies. It was in letting her own world collapse under the weight of truth she had chosen to ignore. The night before the wedding reception's final gathering, I laid everything out one last time. The folder was thick now, heavy with proof, heavy with years of sacrifice preserved in ink. I slid each page into order, checking every seal, every signature, every line that tied her life back to me. When it was finished, I placed the folder into a leather briefcase I had not used in decades. The snap of the lock closing echoed through the room like a gavel striking wood. Final, irrevocable. I stood before the mirror, adjusting my tie, the briefcase resting at my side. For a moment, I hardly recognized the man staring back. No longer the weary father bent under his daughter's indifference, but someone colder, steadier, a man who carried not anger, but evidence. I touched the photograph of my late wife on the mantel. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "she'll see the truth. Not because I say it, but because it cannot be denied." The house was silent, but inside me, a calmness spread. Not the emptiness of defeat, but the clarity of resolve. Tomorrow, Melissa would face the balance sheet of her lies. And when she looked into my eyes, she would know this was never revenge. It was a receipt, waiting to be delivered. The ballroom shimmered again, the chandeliers scattering light across polished marble. Guests filled the space with laughter, unaware of the storm about to break. I entered quietly, the leather briefcase in my hand, my face calm. No one noticed me slip into a seat near the back, just another old man fading into the crowd. But tonight, I was not invisible. As the music softened and the microphone passed between speakers, I rose. The briefcase clicked open, and the sound cut sharper than any violin string. Heads turned. Melissa's smile faltered. I walked to the stage slowly, each step steady, unhurried. When I reached the front, I set the briefcase on the table beside the microphone. My hand didn't shake. I didn't need to raise my voice. Instead, I slid the first page from its sleeve and held it up under the lights. The projector caught it, casting the bold black letters onto the towering screen. Title deed owner, Pedro Vargas. Gasps rippled through the hall. Conversations died mid-sentence. Melissa's in-laws leaned forward, their faces draining of color. Her husband's jaw tightened. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The truth glared down at them in letters too large to ignore. Melissa stepped forward, panic flashing across her perfect smile. This can't. I calmly placed the next document on the screen. A contract, a loan, another receipt of sacrifice written in my name. One by one I stacked them like stones, each louder than any speech I could have given. The ballroom had been her stage. Now it was mine. And with every page, I reclaimed it. The room crackled with disbelief. For a moment, no one breathed. Melissa's fiancé's family, once smug with pride, stared at the glowing words, as though the ground beneath them had opened. The penthouse they had paraded through, the jewel of their social boasting, wasn't hers at all. It was mine. Melissa's voice broke through the silence, high and desperate. "Stop it! This is my wedding, you can't—" Her husband cut her off, his tone ice. "Melissa, is this true?" Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The audience shifted, whispers swelling like a tide. Heads turned, eyes widened, hands covered mouths. The image of the glamorous, independent bride was unraveling thread by thread. I lifted another page. The office lease. My guarantee stamped clear across the bottom. The crowd gasped again. Then the car registration, my name printed beneath hers. Every paper dismantled her story, each one louder than her protests. Melissa stumbled toward me, her heels clattering against marble. She reached for the microphone, but her hand trembled. "He's lying," she shouted, her voice cracking. "He's jealous. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I simply laid the final page under the projector. The trust transfer, recent, sealed, and notarized. The penthouse she boasted of was no longer just under my name. It was locked beyond her reach. Her in-laws' laughter was gone now, replaced by hard stares, their pride turning to fury. Her husband stepped back from her, the distance visible, brutal, the hall filled with murmurs, the weight of truth pressing on every corner. I closed the briefcase slowly, the echo of the clasp sealing more than paper. It sealed Melissa's lies shut forever. The whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Guests leaned across tables, hands cupped to mouths, eyes darting between me and Melissa. Every page I had shown rewrote the story they thought they knew. The radiant bride, the self-made success exposed as nothing without the father she had tried to erase. Melissa's friends shifted in their seats, some already pulling out their phones, recording, snapping photos of the documents glowing on the screen. Her husband's relatives whispered fiercely, their faces flushed with embarrassment and rage. The very people she had fought so hard to impress now looked at her with contempt. One by one, allies turned into critics. A bridesmaid slipped her arm away when Melissa reached for her. A groomsman shook his head and muttered to another guest. Even her business partners in the crowd, faces I recognized from magazines, avoided her gaze, their smiles gone. In a world built on appearances, association with a lie was poison. Melissa tried to speak, but each word cracked, thin and hollow. "You don't understand, he's twisting." But the murmurs drowned her out. The crowd no longer believed her. They didn't want to. I stood silent, my hands resting lightly on the briefcase. I had no need to raise my voice. The documents had spoken, and the room had already chosen its side. For years, Melissa had basked in borrowed light, weaving a story that erased me. But tonight, under the chandeliers, the truth spread faster than her lies ever had. And I could see it in her eyes, the realization that every alliance she thought unshakable was already slipping through her fingers. The day after the wedding, I walked into the notary's office with the same briefcase, though now it felt lighter. The papers inside were no longer just proof, they were action. I signed the final documents with a steady hand, transferring the penthouse fully into the trust I had established. Ironclad, permanent. Melissa would never hold the keys to it again. The notary stamped the papers with a thud that echoed like closure. For years I had written checks that bled me dry, each one a sacrifice. Now, with every signature, I was no longer giving. I was taking back. When I stepped outside, the city buzzed as always. Cars honked, vendors shouted, life went on. Yet to me, everything felt quieter, cleaner. The chains I had carried invisible, heavy, were finally lifting. Melissa's world, meanwhile, began to shrink. I heard from contacts at the bank that her accounts were already restricted, credit lines frozen. Calls from her so-called allies went unanswered. They knew the truth now. She wasn't independent. She was indebted, and I had closed the door. At home, I placed the finalized documents on the table, smoothing them out with care. My wife's photograph watched from the mantel, her smile calm, approving. "It's done," I whispered. "She can't take any more." There was no triumph in my voice, only finality. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. And balance, at last, was mine. The ripples spread quickly. Within days, Melissa's carefully crafted world began to collapse. Calls flooded my old banking colleagues, panicked requests from her husband, from his family. But the accounts were frozen, every credit line severed. The penthouse, her crown jewel, was locked inside the trust. She was locked out. I heard whispers from the city's business circles. Partners pulled out of deals. Investors suddenly grew cold. No one wanted to be tied to a scandal, to a woman who had been unmasked as a fraud at her own wedding. Her husband's family, once boastful, now looked at her with disdain. They had married their son to a woman who came draped in luxury but delivered only shame. At dinner tables, I imagined their voices sharp, their questions merciless. What else did you lie about, Melissa? Friends she had flaunted on social media vanished overnight. The invitations stopped. The likes and comments thinned. Her empire of appearances cracked and fell, piece by fragile piece. And through it all, I remained silent. I didn't gloat. I didn't seek headlines. I simply let the truth do what lies never could: endure. Melissa had always believed money made her untouchable. But now, with every card declined, every door closed, she was forced to face the truth she had buried. Her empire wasn't hers. It was mine, and I had taken it back. The ripples spread quickly. Within days, Melissa's carefully crafted world began to collapse. Calls flooded my old banking colleagues, panicked requests from her husband, from his family. But the accounts were frozen, every credit line severed. The penthouse, her crown jewel, was locked inside the trust. She was locked out. I heard whispers from the city's business circles. Partners pulled out of deals. Investors suddenly grew cold. No one wanted to be tied to a scandal, to a woman who had been unmasked as a fraud at her own wedding. Her husband's family, once boastful, now looked at her with disdain. They had married their son to a woman who came draped in luxury but delivered only shame. At dinner tables, I imagined their voices sharp, their questions merciless. What else did you lie about, Melissa? Friends she had flaunted on social media vanished overnight. The invitations stopped. The likes and comments thinned. Her empire of appearances cracked and fell, piece by fragile piece. And through it all, I remained silent. I didn't gloat. I didn't seek headlines. I simply let the truth do what lies never could: endure. Melissa had always believed money made her untouchable. But now, with every card declined, every door closed, she was forced to face the truth she had buried. Her empire wasn't hers. It was mine, and I had taken it back. It didn't take long before Melissa came knocking, not with her husband, not with her in-laws alone. Her voice on the phone trembled, stripped of the arrogance I had heard at the wedding. Dad, can we talk? We met in a quiet cafe on the edge of the city. She arrived disguised, sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes. The once radiant bride looked smaller now, her shoulders bent under a weight she had never known before. Consequence. Dad, she whispered, sliding into the booth across from me. I made mistakes. I shouldn't have said those things at the wedding. I was trying to impress them. I listened, silent, my hands folded on the table. Her words spilled out in fragments: excuses, half apologies. Please. She spoke of frozen accounts, of angry investors, of a husband who no longer looked at her the same way. I just need your help to fix this, she said finally, her voice breaking. You're the only one who can. Thank you. I can't, man. I studied her face, searching for the girl who once held my hand at night after her mother died, the girl who used to call me her hero. But all I saw was a woman who had turned love into currency and loyalty into leverage. When she finished, I nodded once, slowly, and then I stood. My chair scraped softly against the floor. Melissa's eyes widened. Dad? I placed a few bills on the table for the untouched coffee and walked away. I didn't say a word, because silence this time was louder than anything I could have told her. The fallout inside her husband's family was swift and merciless. I didn't have to be there to know how it unfolded. Word traveled fast in circles built on pride. They had paraded Melissa as proof of their good judgment, boasting about her wealth and independence. Now, she was exposed as a fraud, and by extension, so were they. I heard through acquaintances that the dinners once filled with polite applause had turned into interrogations. Her husband's father, red-faced with rage, demanded to know why he had been deceived. Her mother-in-law, once dripping in condescension, spat questions sharp enough to draw blood. What else have you lied about, Melissa? What else isn't yours? Her husband, the man who once looked at her with adoration, now looked at her with calculation. Love had turned to suspicion, and suspicion to disgust. Within weeks, the distance between them was no longer just emotional, it was physical. He stopped appearing at her side, stopped defending her, stopped pretending. Melissa had wanted to erase me to secure her place in their world. Instead, the truth erased her. The family she bent herself to please now rejected her more brutally than I ever could. I stayed silent, watching from a distance. Not out of cruelty, but out of choice. She had chosen this path. She had carved me out of her story to fit into theirs, and now they were the ones cutting her away. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and the whispers spreading through her new family's halls were louder than any vengeance I could deliver. Weeks later, Melissa came to me again. This time, not in disguise, not with excuses. She appeared at my doorstep, her dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared. She looked nothing like the daughter who had once shone beneath chandeliers. She looked like someone stripped bare by truth. "Dad," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please, just talk to me." I let her inside. She stood in the living room, eyes darting to the photographs of her childhood, still hanging on the walls. For a moment, I saw the little girl clutching her teddy bear, hiding behind my leg. But the memory was quickly swallowed by the woman in front of me, the woman who had put a price tag on her father. She sank into a chair, tears spilling down her face. "I lost everything," she said. "The penthouse, the accounts, my husband. Everyone's gone. I don't know what to do." I sat across from her, the briefcase beside me on the table. I opened it one last time, sliding the final document toward her. The trust papers, the irrevocable signature, proof that what she flaunted could never again be hers. Melissa's hands trembled as she lifted the page. Her lips parted, but no words came. I leaned back, my voice steady, cold, final. "This isn't revenge, Melissa. This is a receipt." The words hung heavy in the air, sealing everything that had come before. No anger, no forgiveness, just truth, written in ink and delivered in silence. She lowered her head, broken. I closed the briefcase and stood. My footsteps echoed through the hall as I walked away, leaving her to face the ruins she had built with her own hands. The house was quiet again. For the first time in years, the silence wasn't heavy. It wasn't the silence of being ignored or erased. It was peace. I sat in my armchair by the window, the morning light spilling across the floor, warm and steady. Melissa's voice no longer echoed in my mind, sharp and demanding. The ballroom humiliation no longer pulsed in my chest. All that remained was stillness, the kind that comes when chains finally break. I brewed a pot of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen. I set out 1 cup, not 2. I had long since grown used to drinking alone. But today, the loneliness felt different. It wasn't emptiness. It was freedom. No more sacrifices demanded, no more debts owed, no more weight on my shoulders that wasn't mine to carry. As I sipped, I looked at the mantel where my wife's photograph rested. Her smile seemed softer somehow, her eyes brighter. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I took care of her. Even when she tried to destroy me, I kept my promise." For the first time, I felt her blessing in the quiet. And for the first time, I let myself breathe without guilt. The world outside carried on cars, voices, the distant hum of life. But in my home, I had something Melissa could never take back. Peace earned through truth, not lies. Freedom carved from dignity, not shame. And as the sun rose higher, I leaned back, letting its warmth settle into my bones. I wasn't erased. I wasn't forgotten. I was free. The days that followed felt different, lighter. I no longer woke to the sound of my own heart pounding with dread. Instead, I woke to silence, to sunlight creeping across the curtains, to the simple rhythm of life without demands. I walked through the rooms of my modest house, each corner holding memories of sacrifice bills paid late so tuition could be on time, repairs postponed so her dreams could stay intact. For years, I had carried those choices like medals no one saw, proof of a devotion that was never acknowledged. Now, I saw them for what they truly were. Chains I had placed on myself. I gave, and I finally stopped giving. There was no shame in what I had done. I had been a father who loved too deeply, who confused sacrifice with obligation. And though Melissa turned my love into a weapon, I had survived it. More than survived, I had reclaimed what was mine. One evening, I sat at the table with a glass of wine, staring at the folder that held the trust papers. They weren't symbols of revenge anymore. They were reminders that I had drawn a line. At last, a line between love and self-destruction. I lifted the glass toward my wife's photograph. To boundaries, I said softly. To balance. To balance. And for the first time, the toast didn't feel bitter, it felt right. News of Melissa's downfall traveled quickly, just as her rise once had. Former friends whispered behind closed doors. Business partners cut ties in silence. Her name, once a badge of ambition, became a cautionary tale, muttered at dinner tables and boardrooms. I heard fragments of it everywhere in the bank's hushed conversations, in neighbors' knowing glances, in the absence of her smiling face from society pages. What she had built on borrowed pride collapsed in the same public light she had craved. And I did nothing to push it along. I didn't need to. The truth was enough, and truth requires no hand to guide it once it's free. At first, I wondered if I should feel pity. But pity is just another chain, and I had cut mine. I no longer chased her acknowledgement, her gratitude, her approval. I no longer tried to protect her from consequences she had chosen. I sat in the park one afternoon, watching children run across the grass, their laughter rising like bells. Parents cheered them on, clapping, calling out encouragement. I thought of Melissa as a child, how she once clutched my hand and looked at me as though I was the whole world. The memory hurt, but only for a moment. Then it passed, carried away by the sound of joy that belonged to others now. Melissa's story was no longer mine to carry. Her collapse was her own, and my freedom came not from destroying her, but from finally letting go. Life settled into a rhythm I had almost forgotten. Neighbors waved when I stepped outside, their smiles genuine, their voices warm. Some of them had seen the headlines. Others only sensed the change in me, the way I carried myself without the old weight, the way my steps no longer dragged. At the corner cafe, the barista began greeting me by name again. "Mr. Vargas, your usual?" she asked with a smile. Small kindnesses, but they filled spaces that once ached with emptiness. Respect didn't need to be grand. It only needed to be real. I spent mornings walking through the park, the air cool, the trees whispering overhead. Parents watched me with soft nods, as if they knew not the details, but the truth that I was a man who had carried storms and come through. Some even asked for advice, and I found myself speaking with ease. No bitterness in my tone. Only lessons carved from fire. At home, the silence was no longer hollow. I read books I had put off for years, tended to the garden, listened to music my wife once loved. Simple things, steady things. And in those moments, I understood that peace isn't loud, it's quiet, and it lasts. Melissa's absence was noticeable, yes, but it no longer stung. I no longer waited for her calls, no longer checked for her name in the news. The world respected me enough, and, at last, I respected myself. For the first time in decades, I lived not as a man giving everything away, but as a man who had something left for himself. One afternoon, I returned to the lawyer's office, not with anger this time, but with purpose. The trust that had once locked Melissa out now held a new possibility. I arranged for part of it to fund scholarships, bearing the name of my late wife. A way to honor her memory, a way to turn sacrifice into legacy. As I signed the documents, I felt something I hadn't in years, pride untainted by bitterness. These funds would not be wasted on arrogance or greed. They would lift up those who truly needed a hand, just as I had once lifted Melissa. Only this time, my giving would be met with gratitude, not contempt. I pictured young students opening letters of acceptance, their futures unlocked by a name they had never known. My wife's name. Her kindness living on through opportunity. It felt right, like closing a circle. The lawyer smiled faintly as he sealed the paperwork. A noble choice, Mr. Vargas. I left his office lighter, the afternoon sun warm on my face. For once, the weight I carried wasn't sacrifice, it was legacy. Not chains, but roots. Roots that would outlast me, roots that no betrayal could erase. At home, I placed a fresh frame on the mantel beside my wife's photo, the official document of the scholarship fund. I stood there for a long time, gazing at the two of them together. Her smile, and the future it now promised to others. For the first time, I didn't feel like a man who had lost. I felt like a man who had built something that would never be broken. It was late evening when Melissa appeared again, this time at my door. No entourage, no pretense, only the dim figure of a daughter who had run out of places to go. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Dad, please, just listen." I let her step inside. She stood in the living room, staring at the photographs of her childhood, still hanging on the walls, proof that no matter how she had tried to erase me, I had never erased her. She turned to me, tears streaming. I was wrong. About everything. I shouldn't have said those things. I shouldn't have treated you that way. I see it now. I lost my husband, my friends, my home. But losing you, Dad, that's the worst. Her words trembled, her body shook. For the first time, she wasn't demanding or mocking. She was pleading. A part of me wanted to reach out, to hold her, to remember the child who once clung to my hand in the dark. But another part knew better. I listened. I let her pour out apologies, promises, desperate vows. And when she finished, when silence finally stretched between us, I spoke only 4 words. I hear you. Then I turned, walked to the door, and opened it. Melissa froze, her lips parting in shock. Dad? I said nothing more. My silence was not cruelty, it was clarity. Forgiveness was a gift I no longer owed. She stepped out into the night, tears falling. I closed the door gently, the sound final, not harsh. For the first time I felt no anger, no grief, only freedom. Morning broke clear and golden, the kind of light that feels like a blessing. I stepped outside, the air cool against my face, the street waking slowly around me. For years, I had carried the weight of sacrifice, the ache of betrayal, the sting of humiliation. But as I walked into that morning, I carried nothing at all. I passed neighbors who nodded warmly, their greetings simple but sincere. I paused at the park, watching children run, their laughter rising like music. I thought of Melissa then, not with bitterness, not with longing, but with distance. Her choices were her own now, her consequences hers to bear. I no longer stood in the shadows of her story. The chains I had worn, guilt, duty, endless giving, had fallen away. What remained was a man unburdened, a man who had loved, who had lost, and who had finally chosen himself. At the edge of the park, I stopped beneath a tree, sunlight dappling through the leaves. I whispered softly, as if to the wind, "Freedom isn't taking back what was stolen. It's walking away without chains." Then I kept walking, not once looking back, because there was nothing left behind worth carrying. Only the road ahead, only freedom.